Two people walk into the same dealership on the same morning. They both want the same car. They both make a decision they feel good about. By the time the full accounting is done, one of them will have spent somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000 more than the other without ever realizing it happened. This is the story of how that gap gets built, month by month, across a decade, through a financing structure centered on the single number most people focus on. That number is the monthly payment. It is the figure on every car commercial and the one written on the card the salesman slides across the desk. Most people use it as the primary signal for whether a deal makes sense. The actual cost of a car decision runs much deeper, and when you run the full math, the gap between these two paths is larger and more structurally significant than almost anyone expects going in. Here is the specific scenario. Ryan and Daniel both want the same $33,000 sedan. Ryan signs a 36-month lease, $2,500 due at signing, and $309 every month. Daniel takes a 60-month auto loan at 6%, $4,000 down, and $560 a month. The monthly gap between them is exactly $251, and Daniel can feel every cent of it starting on the day he drives home. On day one, Ryan pockets $251 in monthly savings and drives off the lot in a brand new car under full warranty. Daniel drives off in the same car, paying $560 a month for the privilege of building toward ownership. By every visible metric at that moment, the score clearly favors Ryan. If this kind of financial analysis is useful to you, subscribing keeps these videos coming. For 36 months, Ryan is living the version of car ownership that looks good on the surface. Brand new vehicle, full manufacturer warranty, and a monthly payment $251 lower than Daniel's. Something goes wrong mechanically? Covered. The engine warning light comes on in month 22? Covered. His ongoing costs are fuel, insurance, and the monthly lease payment. The arrangement feels simple and stress-free because for 3 years, it essentially is. Daniel is having a different experience. He is paying $560 every month and watching the car's market value fall in real time. The moment he drove off the lot, the $33,000 car was worth closer to $30,000. By the end of year one, it has dropped to roughly $24,500, while his remaining loan balance sits around $23,900, barely above water on paper, and getting there cost him nearly $11,000 in payments. The interest portion of each monthly payment is at its highest right now, which means the principal balance is dropping more slowly than the payment amount suggests. The psychological weight of this is real. The depreciation picture makes the early years feel particularly discouraging for a buyer. A $33,000 car loses value fastest during exactly the period when the buyer is also paying the most interest. Both forces move in the same direction at the same time, making the first 2 years feel like the most expensive stretch of the entire loan, and financially, they are. But that trajectory reverses. The interest portion shrinks every month as the principal drops, and depreciation slows considerably after the first few years. By year 3, Daniel's loan balance has fallen to approximately $12,600, and the car is worth around $18,000. He has crossed into clear positive equity and owns something worth more than he owes on it. Ryan never gets there. Every dollar he pays belongs entirely to the leasing company. The residual value of the vehicle, the number the leasing company locked in at the start to define what the car would be worth at lease end, is a figure that belongs to them. Daniel is building toward something month by month. Ryan is simply paying for access. At the 36-month mark, Ryan's lease ends. He drives back to the dealership and faces 3 options. The first is buying the car at its predetermined residual value, the price locked in at the beginning of the lease to represent what the car would be worth at the end. On a $33,000 sedan, that residual typically lands somewhere between $17,000 and $19,000. The second option is walking away entirely. returning the keys and owing nothing beyond any end of lease fees. The third option is signing a new lease on a newer car and starting the cycle again. The data on what people actually do here is not ambiguous. Roughly 80% of lessees sign another lease. Ryan does what most people in his position do. New car, new contract, another $2,500 at signing, and another $309 a month, another 36 months on the clock. The odometer resets to 0. The payment counter does not. Now look at where Daniel stands at that same moment. He is 36 months into a 60-month loan and still has 24 payments remaining. That is frustrating, and he knows it. But here is what is different about his position. He has an end date. Every single payment he makes moves him one step closer to owning the car completely. Every payment Ryan makes moves him one step closer to giving the car back. This is the structural difference between the two arrangements that the monthly payment comparison entirely obscures. One path is a conveyor belt with no exit. The other has a finish line with a date attached to it. Month 60 arrives. Daniel makes his final payment. The car is his. Title in hand. No outstanding balance. No further obligation to any lender. From this point forward, his only car-related costs are fuel, insurance, and whatever maintenance the vehicle needs. For a well-maintained sedan at that mileage, monthly maintenance runs somewhere between $100 and $150 on average. Oil changes, tires on schedule, brake pads when needed, the occasional minor repair. Ryan, at month 60, is still writing a check for $309 every single month with no end in sight. Now, the scoreboard at the end of year 6. Ryan has completed exactly 2 full lease cycles. His total spend, $2,500 down on the first lease, $11,124 in payments, then another $2,500 at signing, and another $11,124 for the second. That totals $27,248. He owns no car, holds no title, and has no equity in anything. He is standing at the start of a potential third lease. Daniel's total spend, $4,000 down plus 60 monthly payments of $560, which comes to $37,600 in full. He also owns a car that is 6 years old and worth approximately $11,000 to $13,000. That asset matters, and it needs to be handled carefully here. If Daniel sold the car immediately and used that roughly $12,000 back, his net outlay drops to around $25,600. If he keeps driving it, he spent $37,600 and holds a car he owns outright with 0 remaining monthly obligation. Either way, Ryan spent $27,248 and holds nothing. This framing shows where the real advantage actually sits. In gross payment terms, Ryan spent less across 6 years. But Daniel owns something, and more critically, Daniel's payments are done. His car-related costs going forward drop to roughly $100 to $150 a month in routine maintenance. Ryan's payments will resume the moment he signs another lease, and they never stop unless he changes his behavior entirely. Daniel will never face another required car payment unless he chooses to buy again. That is the structural asymmetry the monthly payment number never reveals, which leads directly to the part of a lease contract that most people never study carefully before signing. The monthly payment is not the complete picture of what a lease costs. The agreement surrounding that number contains conditions that can add hundreds or even thousands of dollars to the final bill, and most of them only surface at the very end when the keys go back across the desk. Mileage caps are the first condition most people underestimate. Standard lease agreements allow between 10,000 and 12,000 miles per year. That sounds reasonable until you check the actual average, which sits around 13,500 miles annually for American drivers. That means the average person driving the average number of miles is already over the limit before the lease even expires. The penalty for exceeding the cap typically runs between 15 and 25 cents per mile. If Ryan drives 5,000 miles over the limit across 3 years, that is anywhere from $750 to $1,250 due in a lump sum on the day he returns the car. It does not appear in the monthly payment. It shows up as a final bill. Wear and tear is the second category that generates end-of-lease surprises. When Ryan returns the vehicle, the dealership inspects it and charges for anything they classify as beyond normal use. The door ding from a parking lot, the light scuff on a rear wheel from a curb, a small stain on the back seat. The critical detail here is that normal wear and tear is defined by the leasing company, not by the driver. What Ryan might consider an ordinary minor blemish on a 3-year-old car, the dealer's inspector might document as a billable condition. These charges are entirely at the discretion of the party, who also profits from them. Then there is the disposition fee, which a significant portion of lessees have never heard of before they encounter it. When a driver returns a leased car and does not sign another lease with the same manufacturer, the leasing company charges a fee simply to process the return and prepare the car for resale. That fee typically runs between $300 and $500. It exists because the dealer needs to recondition and remarket the vehicle, and the structure of the lease places that cost on the person handing back the keys. There is also the early termination risk, which does not hit drivers who complete their term, but can be devastating for anyone whose circumstances change mid-lease. Job loss, relocation, a growing family that suddenly needs a different vehicle. Getting out of a lease early can expose the driver to the entire remaining payment balance. There is no graceful exit ramp built into the standard agreement. Now, a full accounting of this comparison requires honesty about what buying costs once the warranty period ends. The manufacturer's coverage on most sedans runs roughly 3 to 4 years, or a set mileage threshold. Once that window closes, Daniel is responsible for everything. Brakes wear out. Tires need replacing on schedule. The air conditioning compressor can fail on the most inconvenient day of the year. For a typical sedan driven consistently, post-warranty maintenance averages somewhere between $1,200 and $1,800 annually. Some years it is nothing beyond routine service. Other years it is a single repair that costs more than 3 months of former loan payments combined. The 10-year picture is where the full financial difference becomes visible, though it deserves an honest presentation rather than an overstated one. Ryan, repeating the same lease cycle, will complete roughly 3 full cycles by year 9 and be partway into a 4th by the 10-year mark. His total spend across that decade lands somewhere between $46,000 and $50,000, depending on how cleanly each lease return goes, and whether he accumulates mileage overages or wear charges along the way. He holds no asset at any point in that window. Daniel's 10-year total, including the loan and an estimated $9,000 to $12,000 in maintenance across the full ownership period, runs in the same general range. On gross spending alone, the figures at 10 years are closer than most people expect going in. The critical difference is not the total amount spent at year 10. It is the structure of what happens after month 60. Daniel's required car payments stopped. His ongoing costs from that point forward are maintenance only, running roughly $100 to $150 a month. Ryan's required monthly payment never stopped and never will unless his behavior changes entirely. Over years 6 through 10, Daniel spends roughly $6,000 to $9,000 on maintenance. Ryan spends at minimum another $20,000 on lease payments alone, plus new down payments with each renewal cycle. That is the asymmetry that compounds, not just the total at year 10, but the diverging monthly cost structures that extend indefinitely from that point forward, with one person paying permanently and the other not. Now, some of you are already running a specific counter calculation in your head, and it is a fair instinct worth addressing directly. If Ryan takes that $251 of monthly savings and puts it into an index fund averaging 8% annually, does the math shift? The answer is yes, meaningfully so, with one important condition. He actually has to do it, consistently, every month, for years. The number looks compelling on a spreadsheet. In practice, that $251 tends to get absorbed into monthly expenses rather than systematically invested. The discipline required to make the investment scenario work is real, and most people who justify a lease using this reasoning do not execute the investing side of it. Be honest with yourself about whether you would actually follow through on that plan every single month without fail. There are situations where the math genuinely tilts toward leasing, and a complete analysis requires acknowledging them. If you are self-employed or operate a business, lease payments can be partially or fully deductible as a business expense based on vehicle use, an advantage that can substantially close or completely eliminate the ownership gap. If you drive a high-end luxury vehicle where out-of-warranty repairs are genuinely expensive, staying permanently inside the warranty window has real dollar value that cannot be dismissed. A $3,000 service visit on a European performance sedan is a fundamentally different conversation than routine maintenance on a mainstream commuter car. There is also a third path that the lease versus buy framing tends to crowd out of the conversation, and the comments on videos like this one consistently surface it as the most financially logical option available to most people. Buying a used car, specifically one that is 3 to 5 years old, sidesteps the steepest portion of the depreciation curve entirely. A car that left the dealership new at $33,000 3 years ago might be purchased today for somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000. The buyer who takes that route lets someone else absorb the most brutal depreciation years and enters ownership at the point where value loss has already begun to flatten out. A 3-year-old vehicle from a reliable manufacturer often still carries remaining factory warranty coverage or qualifies for a certified pre-owned program with extended coverage. The mechanical risk profile looks very similar to a new car for the first year or two of ownership, but the purchase price is dramatically lower. If that same used car buyer finances a modest amount at a reasonable rate and commits to keeping the vehicle for another 7 to 10 years, their total transportation cost over a decade is lower than either Ryan's or Daniel's scenario in most cases. The math works because depreciation is not linear. It is front-loaded and steep in years 1 through 3. Then it flattens considerably. A 5-year-old car does not lose value at anything close to the rate of a new one. The person who buys at year 3 is paying for the vehicle after the most expensive depreciation has already happened. And if they hold it long enough, they spend years driving something with a near zero monthly cost beyond routine maintenance. That payment-free period is where real financial separation from habitual lessees tends to compound most clearly. The most common objection to this strategy is the reliability concern, and it deserves a direct response. A used vehicle from a manufacturer with a strong reliability record and documented maintenance history carries a meaningfully different risk profile than a random used car purchased without research. Brands like Toyota, Honda, and Lexus routinely achieve 200,000 miles with appropriate maintenance schedules. The risk of catastrophic repair on a well-selected 3-year-old vehicle from one of these manufacturers is genuinely low during the first several years of ownership, which is precisely the window when the financial advantage over leasing is building. The deeper behavioral pattern worth examining is what happens at the finish line. Daniel's loan ends at month 60, but a significant portion of buyers in the real world do not keep the car much beyond that point. The moment the payment stops, the temptation to restart the cycle with something newer is real and very common. The financial advantage of buying only fully materializes if the owner keeps driving the paid-off vehicle for several more years. Every month past month 60 that Daniel drives without a payment is a month where his effective transportation cost is genuinely low, and the cumulative gap between his position and Ryan's widens further. The psychological dimension of leasing has a financial consequence that rarely gets quantified. When Ryan signs his second lease, the monthly payment does not feel like a new financial decision. It feels like a bill renewal. The amount is familiar, the process is routine, and the psychological friction of choosing to spend that money has been eliminated entirely. This is precisely what makes the permanent payment cycle so durable. It stops registering as a recurring choice. It becomes background noise. And background noise still costs money. It simply stops feeling like a cost each month. The lower monthly payment that made the lease feel like the smarter arrangement on signing day is also the feature that makes it easiest to remain in the cycle indefinitely without ever consciously deciding to stay there. Daniel's loan had friction built into it from the beginning. $560 a month is not a number that fades quietly into the background. He felt every payment, and he felt the countdown toward the finish line. The payment pressure that looked like a disadvantage in years 1 through 3 actually functioned as a forcing mechanism for reaching ownership. The discomfort of a higher payment kept the endpoint visible and motivating. Ryan's more comfortable monthly amount removed that friction, and with it, the psychological urgency to reach a point where payments actually stop. The lifetime implication of this dynamic is where the numbers move into a different category. Most people make 6, 7, maybe 8 car decisions across their adult lives, and each one is a new opportunity to either extend the permanent payment cycle or reset toward ownership. Consider someone who leases continuously across 4 decades of driving. At the numbers in Ryan's scenario, that represents roughly 13 full cycles and a cumulative outlay approaching $600,000. None of which ever results in an extended period of payment-free transportation or any owned asset to show for it. Compare that to someone who buys and holds across the same period, accepts higher monthly amounts in the early years of each ownership cycle, then drives payment-free for years at a stretch between purchases. The cumulative gap across a lifetime of car decisions is not measured in tens of thousands. It belongs in an entirely different category. The framing that dominates most car buying decisions reduces everything to a single monthly figure because that is the most favorable way to present the true cost of a vehicle. Dealers understand that most buyers decide based on whether the payment fits comfortably into monthly cash flow, not on what the vehicle will actually cost when the full accounting is done. The question that consistently produces better long-term financial outcomes is not whether the monthly payment is affordable, but what this decision actually costs when it is completely over.